So it's important for musicians to learn how to play things in all 12 keys for obviously reasons of accompaniment, improvisation, or just performance-based things that are done in front of an audience. But for composers learning things in all 12 keys or all 12 pitch centers, there's different reasons why it's a good idea. Mainly because it helps to practice in this way to internalize a chord or a harmony or a voicing. If you play it in all 12 keys over and over again, it just becomes part of your vocabulary, and it can just become part of the composing process, which, different to performing and improvisation, that creative process of composing is a very sort of slow, methodical, experimentation-based kind of creating. And if you do play things in all 12 keys, it can only expand and build your vocabulary of the musical language, which is infinite. In my chord of the week videos, whichever chord I'm focusing on, or sometimes it's a pair of chords or it's a specific voicing that I'm focusing on in that video, at the end I always give some exercises, and almost every time I run it through the circle of fifths. And running it through the circle of fifths either to the left or the right, those are two really good ways to play something on all 12 keys. To the left, you're moving in authentic cadences, right? This idea of 5-1, descending fifths or ascending fourths. And that root cycle, we can call it a root cycle, is this, if you follow the circle of fourths to the left from C. And that covers all 12 keys. And you can also go to the right, and that's a plagal movement. It's the sound of 4-1. Or it's a descending fourth, or it's an ascending fifth. And that cycle sounds like this. And that gets you through all 12 keys too. And of course, there's always the chromatic scale as a root cycle. You can run major triads through that. Technically, I'm playing through all 12 keys, but it's not a very interesting way to do it. If you were to use the circle of fifths with voice leading, say with the authentic movement to the left, you get this. Or the other way, plagal movement, you get this. And those are two really common ways to get through all 12 keys. There are a few options that I wanted to throw out. One is third-based, based in minor thirds, ascending. So imagine ascending thirds from C, minor thirds creating a fully diminished seventh chord from C, and then a fourth higher from F, and then a fourth higher again from B flat. And that root cycle gets you through all 12 keys using only thirds. And if we were to run, say, major triads through that cycle, it sounds like this. And that's all 12 keys. The inverse of that one is to go in reverse in descending minor thirds from C like this. And then a fourth lower from G, and then from D, fourth lower than that. So I'm kind of combining minor thirds and descending fourths like this, and descending fourth from C, and from G. Right, so I'm still creating those fully diminished seventh chords descending, and that gets us through all 12 keys as well. So you can run any chord voicing through that root cycle, where that root cycle decides what your next chord will be.
Brilliant.
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 And
Brilliant.
there's a couple others still based in thirds, where if you did ascending major thirds, creating augmented triads like this, and then from F, from B flat, and from E flat. Still, it's all thirds. And let's take, like, let's say C major triad with an add 2. And we'll run it through that cycle. So that'll be C add 2, E, A flat, F, A, D flat, B flat, D, F sharp, E flat, G, B, and that's all 12 keys, just with an add 2 major triad. So already you can see you get some really interesting sounds. So just playing around with these will give you new ideas, and it'll also at the same time train your ears to really internalize whatever harmony it is you're working on. I'm picking some simple ones just to demonstrate. The last root cycle is the inverse of that one I just showed you. Instead of ascending major thirds, it'll be descending major thirds. Let's do it from here. And then from G, from D, and from A. So between those 2 cycles from the circle of fifths, the ascending minor thirds, descending minor thirds, ascending major thirds, and descending major thirds. That's 6 ways to get through all 12 keys in a symmetrical way. Obviously, you could do tone rows where you take the 12 chromatic tones, put them in any random order, and you'd play all your chords in that order. And you'd use the tone row to decide what your next chord would be. The problem with that is it's harder to memorize tone rows when it's easier to memorize something that's more symmetrical like this. It's easier to memorize. And your brain has to exist in 2 places. You have to know the root cycle, that is the skeletal structure that you're playing all of your chords through, and you have to know what is the chord that I'm playing at the same time. So it's very good for the brain. It's just really good musical training for composers. And what I felt was always lacking in my training as a composer was a method for practicing in the same way that I practiced as a guitar player as a kid or as a sax player as a kid. There was a method in how to do it and how to build my chops and my vocabulary. So those are root cycles. You can use those to practice your chord progressions. Any chord voicing that you have, run it through any of these root cycles. Make up your own. Have fun with it. Keep working hard with it. Thanks for watching and listening as always, and happy practicing.
Yeah. Who this? This beat. Yo, who this? Yo, who this? Who this?